A letter, creased, delicate, faded, stored in a special box for years. A reminiscence in a journal, worn, disintegrating slowly with time, carefully tucked away. These speak across the generations, keeping alive a memory. Their words portray an experience almost impossible for the mind to imagine. A young boy's emotions touch the hearts of his children, grandchildren, all the generations of his posterity. His experiences, his trials and triumphs, echo through the years. 13-year-old Heber McBride journeyed to Utah with his family in 1856 as part of the Martin Handcart Company. Many years later, he recorded his memories in a letter to his daughter and within the pages of a journal. His words and those of his younger brothers, Ether and Peter, take us with them along the trail.
Father and mother were among the first converts to Mormonism. I was born May 13, 1843, in Churchtown, Lancashire, England, about 18 miles from Preston, where the gospel was first preached. My father and family left England in 1856 to come over to America, as he and all the family belonged to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the gathering place for the saints was in Utah, North America. Everything we had was sold at auction, and it brought a good price. It seemed very hard for Mother to part with her brother and mother, who was getting very old. I was delighted at the idea of being on the water in such a big ship. It was all fun and pleasure for me. I was in and out and everywhere I ought not to be. Kept my parents in hot water all the time until we got ready to sail. I know we were 5 weeks on the sea. Some of the time it was very rough. There was seasickness plenty, some of the people being sick all the way. I was not seasick any of the time. And when land was sighted, I almost felt sorry. We could see Boston City in the distance. We had to stay a day or two on the ship, the doctors and custom house officers coming on board and examining everything. Then the ship began unloading, and everything was kept in good order. All the little boys had a good time running all over town and getting into all kinds of mischief. I know our parents were very glad to leave the city and get us on the railroad cars where they could watch us a little better. Well, we got very tired of that way of traveling. When we got to Iowa City, it was late in the day, and our campground was 3 miles from the city. So a great many of the people started for camp on foot, just about dark. We'd not gone very far when it began to rain and was so dark that you could not see anything. Iowa can beat the world for thunder and lightning. There we had to stay 3 weeks before we could start on our journey, as we were coming with handcarts. There was 7 of us in the family. All we had was one little handcart, and that got to be too much for us before we got through. It was a great sight to see about 600 people started for Utah with handcarts. Nothing of interest, only hard work. We got along first rate till we crossed the Missouri River. After we left Florence a little while, Mother was taken sick with chills and fever. Those that were sick had the privilege of riding in the wagons, as there were a few wagons to haul our provisions. Mother would walk as far as she could by holding on to the carts. Then we would get her into one of the wagons. The baby we had to haul all the way. The next one was 6 years old and then 8, but they walked. While the weather was good, we got along very well. But as we journeyed along, the teams began to give out. Our trouble began in earnest, for there was no more chance for the sick to ride. Then we had to haul them on our carts. I being the oldest boy, just past 13 years old, and my sister 3 years older than me. We had to pull the handcart all the way. When food got scarce and it began to get cold, the men began to give out. Teams gave out. so many sick and dying, couldn't all ride. And then we were reduced to half a pound of flour a day for grown people and 4 ounces for children under 12 years old. Father began to fail very rapidly and got so reduced that he could not pull anymore at the handcart, but could manage to walk along for a few days. In the mornings, Father and Mother would start out to walk till one would give out, sit down or lay down, till we came along and got them on the cart and rode until the other one was given out. Then the one that was on the cart was rested. Then we would take the other one on the cart. One would walk by holding to the cart. We would not get into camp until after dark. Then we used to cry and feel so bad. We did not know what to do. Well, this is about the way we had to get along. We passed through about the same every day till we crossed the last crossing of the Platte River. One evening we crossed the Platte River for the last time. It was very cold. The next morning there was about 6 inches of snow on the ground. Then what we had to suffer can never be told. Father was very bad this morning, could hardly sit up in the tent. We had to travel that day through the snow. I managed to get Father into one of the wagons that morning. When we camped, the snow was getting deep, and my sister and me had to pitch our tent and get some wood. After we had made Mother comfortable as we could, we went to try to find Father. But the wind was blowing snow so bad we could not see anything. The wagons had not got into camp, and it was then after dark. I couldn't find him. So you'll have to imagine how we felt. The next morning, the snow was about 18 inches deep and awful cold. But while my sister was preparing our little bite of breakfast, I went to look for Father. At last I found him under a wagon with snow all over him, and he was stiff and dead. I felt as though my heart would burst. I sat down beside him in the snow and took hold of one of his hands and cried, "Oh, Father, Father." Whether he was dead and was put there, or how he got there, will never be known. Tongue nor pen can never tell the sorrow and the suffering. There we were, away out on the plains with hardly anything to eat. Father dead, and Mother sick, and a widow with 5 small children, hardly able to live from one day to another. After I had my cry out, I went back to the tent and told Mother. Now, to try and write to tell the feelings of Mother and the other children is out of the question. 13 men died that one night, and all were piled into one pit. All died by hardship and starvation. The snow and the cold was something awful. Our clothing was all about done. When we went to bed, we didn't have bedding to keep us warm. I have wondered many times how it was we ever lived. My sister and I used to pray we could die to get out of our misery. After laying over a few days, the word came to camp that there were wagons from Salt Lake that had come to meet us and were camped about 40 or 50 miles from where we were. When we got word about the wagons being ahead of us, we received an extra half-pound of flour and orders to start out in the morning. It had been thawing some, so the snow was not so deep, and the news of the wagons waiting for us seemed to put new life into every one of us. In the morning, we started in good time, but made very little progress. We trudged along through snow and mud. Before we got to the Sweetwater, we met 5 teams from Utah. They had come so much farther than they had expected to, that they were nearly out of provisions. But they were workers. They put the tents up and got wood and took care of Mother and the 3 little ones. The wagons relieved us some of the load by taking the sick into their wagons and a few other things such as tents and cooking things. There were 2 men to each wagon, and as they were hearty and strong, they took upon themselves all the work about the camp. We got to Devil's Gate. It was so cold all day we could hardly make it. But when we got there, the tents were up and big fires burning. Sister and I cried for joy. It seemed so nice to have nothing to do. But when we got up in the morning, the snow was 18 inches deep, and the north wind blowing hard and cold. The men came and took the tent down, fixed our load on our cart, and they went ahead and broke the road. We went about 2 miles and turned and crossed Sweetwater. When we saw that, we felt very bad to think we had to ford that stream. I don't think we could have made it in our weakened condition. But when we got there, we were very much surprised, for there were some men there, and they carried us across. We went into a cove in the mountains and got out of the wind. When we got there, the tent was up, and Mother and Mrs. Barton were sitting by a good fire. There we waited for help. If it came in time, we were safe. And if not, starvation was our fate. We were reduced to 4 ounces of flour a day for all those that were over 12 years of age, 2 ounces for those under that age, and nothing else. Then they began killing the poor oxen that had not died, and distributing the hide and bones among the people to try and keep them from starving. Then was the time to hear children crying for something to eat. Nearly all the children would cry themselves to sleep every night. My 2 little brothers would get in the sack that had flour, turn it wrong side out, and sucked and licked the flour dust off it. We would break the bones and make a little soup by boiling them and put in what little flour we had, for we did not get enough flour to make bread. It looked like we would all die. The last few days we stayed in camp, the weather began to moderate and the snow began to go off some. When we left this place, we left our hand carts behind, which was a great relief to us. All the small children and the old and those that were weak and worn out had the privilege of riding in the wagons. My sister and me would see Mother and Peter and Maggie fixed in the wagon. Then Ether, Janetta, and me, we'd walk along with the others. My brother Peter wrote in his journal, one day we got word that some teams were coming to meet us from the valley. That night, 3 teams came and reported more on the road, and no one but a person having gone through the experience can imagine what a happy moment it was for this belated Handcart Company. Peter said, men, women, and children knelt down and thanked the Almighty God for our delivery from certain death. We soon met more teams, then we all got to ride. I read my brother Ether's journal, and he said, I well remember how glad we all were and how we all rejoiced in the prospects of arriving in the valley. We were all loaded into the wagons. We traveled slowly along early and late till we arrived at the big mountain. The snow was very deep. There was a great many men there from Salt Lake with shovels, digging the snow out of the road so the teams could pull the wagon up the long hill. And they had built fires along the side of the road so people could get warm, as all who were able to walk had to do so. Finally, we got to the top, and then it was all downhill. We finally arrived in Salt Lake City on the 30th day of November, 1856. When we got to Salt Lake City, we were well cared for.
It is good to look to the past to gain appreciation for the present and perspective for the future. It is good to look upon the virtues of those who've gone before to gain strength for whatever lies ahead. It is good to reflect upon the work of those who labored so hard and gained so little in this world, but out of whose dreams and early plans, so well nurtured, has come a great harvest of which we are the beneficiaries. Their tremendous example can become a compelling motivation for each of us. For each of us is a pioneer in his own life, often in his own family, and many of us pioneer daily in seeking to do God's will and lift and serve those around us.